Borough, Croeso i'r cyfarfod bwrdd iechyd. This is an extraordinary meeting called for today at 10:30, the 15th of February, to consider two reports that have been received on commission by the Health Board from the Royal College of Surgeons concerning vascular services. I have some introductory remarks, opening remarks to make. I won't make those yet because I wish to first do the apologies for absence and declarations of any interest. So in terms of apologies, I have apologies received from Cheryl Carlisle and Jill Harris, both of whom are representing the board at a mental health summit at this time. Morwenna Edwards, who can't be with us today, Sue Green, Sue Hill, Adrian Thomas, and Nikki Calais. So they are the apologies I have recorded. Are there any declarations of interest that anybody wishes to make in terms of this extraordinary meeting and the item that we're about to discuss? No? Okay. So I wish to make some opening remarks in terms of vascular services and what we are here to discuss today. Let me firstly say that I find it somewhat difficult to adequately describe the anger and concern that I feel in light of the two reports produced by the Royal College of Surgeons. Since the change to the service model, the board has sought assurance at many a point about the implementation of the new service model and the quality and safety of the services provided to patients. We have on those occasions been what I would describe to be reassured but not assured by a number of senior people in the organisation. In 2020, the board instructed that an independent review was to be carried out. What we came to be presented with was a report compiled by a senior clinician within the organisation, which did not satisfy our expectation of independence, nor did we consider it sufficiently comprehensive. Consequently, as our concerns built rather than they were allayed by what we were being presented with, and informed by commentary both inside and outside the organisation, and some work undertaken by the CHC, in the autumn of 2020, we instructed that a further and truly independent review was to be carried out, and hence the engagement of the Royal College of Surgeons came about, and we agreed the terms of reference as a board for that review. The two reports by the RCS and the range and level of concerns they highlight show categorically that the board and others are of a right to be concerned, and moreover demonstrate significant inadequacies and failures which are shocking and completely unacceptable by any measure. As well as considering the direct responses to the reports and their recommendation, there is an immediate need to demonstrate urgency in all matters concerned with the service, determine whether harm has been or continues to be caused to patients, re-examine the quality and safety of all services and determine whether some services should be provided by a vascular service external to North Wales, consider whether any aspects of the service should be suspended, examine the basis upon which a number of people sought to reassure the board, examine whether some of the failures highlighted, e.g. in the areas of informed consent, clinical record keeping and multidisciplinary team working, are to be found in other service areas across the health board, and also to improve the line of sight between point of service delivery, the ET, the executive team, and senior managers and onto the board. Well, that is not an exhaustive list, but they are some of the cross-cutting issues that this board needs to be assured about rather than reassured about moving forward. Now, I know that the chief executive and her team, and particularly our new medical director, are as appalled as I am, and the wider board are, and I invite them now to share their observations and the proposed response to the discrete findings in the two reports, as well as the broader considerations I've sought to highlight a moment ago. Joe.
Borodar, thank you, Chairman. Before I hand over to Nick, I would like to acknowledge the commitment of the BC UHB board in commissioning the RCS review of
I think Joe's frozen on us.
We've lost Joe, as you will have noticed, I feel sure. We are both in Carlton Court. She's going to attempt to reconnect. Can everybody hear me?
Yes.
Yes.
And Chair.
I don't want to go ahead until we've heard from Joe, because it's important that we do. So can you just bear with me for the moment, please? Apologies, Joe is just redialing in via a different device, so we still need to wait for her to do so.
Apologies, colleagues. Unfortunately, the technology let me down just now. So if I may restart. Before I hand over to Nick, I would like to acknowledge the commitment of BCUH Board in commissioning the RCS review of the vascular service in order to provide the independent oversight and view of the vascular network. This report is delivered in two parts, the second part being under particular consideration today. The findings of the report are accepted in full, and we are committed to learn and improve our vascular services. I would like to sincerely apologise to patients, their families, board colleagues, the CHC and Welsh Government for the time it has taken to implement our vascular network in North Wales, and commit wholeheartedly to the implementation of the improvement plan, which Nick will discuss. As Nick will outline, the oversight associated with the implementation of the findings across both reports is in process of being strengthened, building on external clinical partnerships and independent chairing. Conversations with regulators, including with regulators of individual professional practice, have commenced. A due process will be followed on all such matters, and should regulatory or other action be required, this will be managed through our normal agreed and due processes. The tripartite, that is Health Improvement Wales, Welsh Government and Audit Wales, have considered our position with regard to targeted intervention, and we await confirmation with regard to that position. We have already committed to provide monthly monitoring updates to the Minister on progress being made in the implementation of Part 1 and Part 2 of the RCS review. Finally, we're committed to communicating with patients, with individuals, and ensuring we acknowledge and support the many committed and hardworking clinicians and MDT members within our vascular service who have worked tirelessly within the service as we continue to work on the improvements required. I'd like to hand over at this point in time to Dr. Nick Lyons. Thank you.
Diolch yn fawr. Thank you, Jo. Thank you, Chair. I firstly would want to acknowledge that the second part of the Royal College of Surgeons review describes a clinical service that has not always treated patients in a way that is acceptable or is right. I apologise to those families where we've let you down, and with my colleagues give an absolute commitment that the Health Board will now continue its work to deliver sustainable, reliable and effective improvements. I'm a doctor, and my professional standards and my ethics are incredibly important to me. It upsets me, and I know it upsets my colleagues, that when I read of the experiences of some patients in this report, we've truly not done what we should have done. I give my absolute personal commitment alongside my colleagues to now making the changes that the college recommends. This second report reviewed over the last 7 years, pre and post adoption of the networked model of vascular care that was implemented in 2019. And I think I really ought to emphasise that the report should be read alongside the first college report that was published in March 2021. And as Mark has already said, this followed the board's invitation to the college to review the service in order to support improvements, but also to provide greater assurance of the service's safety and quality. And that's the report that's now in front of us. I'd like to summarise how we continue to drive improvements, improve the safety, the quality, and the day-to-day patient experience for every patient who entrusts their care to our vascular service. I think it is also appropriate to emphasise that the college supports the networked hub and spoke model of care in their review, and also to remind ourselves that there is no recommendation that safety or quality concerns are such that we should close or we should curtail our services. There is good, and there has been progress made in the existing vascular improvement plan. This is overseen by the recently reinvigorated vascular steering group with representation from the Community Health Council and patients. And this group has already documented in its reports to the Quality and Safety, the QSE committee, evidence of ongoing service improvements. And whilst this includes the recruitment of senior medical staff and indeed the 3 further specialty doctors who will commence contracts in the next few months, there's also a huge amount that is left still to be done. The second report that's before us today shines a light on some areas that we were not previously cited on, and we must ensure that we act promptly and effectively to respond to those findings, but also to ensure that those actions are embedded and they lead to long-term sustainable transformation. I'm not, Chair, in favour of us just completing an action plan. What we need to do is to make things right for our staff and for our patients on an ongoing basis. You'll have all read the report, and I'm happy to take any questions, but I'd like to take a moment or two to highlight some of the areas within the action plan produced in response to this second part report. We have set up a vascular quality panel with an external chair who comes with national reputation, and I would expect that we'll be able to confirm that appointment in the next day or so. This vascular quality panel will review the cases within this report, but also in addition other cases, to ensure that we fully understand what has been happening in our service in order that we can make things right for the future. We will consider within that panel whether there are any further care or clinical actions that need to be taken, and we'll fulfil our duty of candour that we haven't always done, so that we're completely open and honest with patients and their families. And I can't underestimate the importance of this exercise, painful though it may be for us. Additionally, there's urgent work underway to look at the quality of our notes, with weekly review of notes within the vascular service already having commenced and the rapid improvement cycle in place. We cannot be complacent because the findings of the Royal College have been found in that weekly review of notes that commenced in January this year. We're putting in training to ensure that all clinicians understand the professional standards, those basic professional standards that are expected of them, but also to ensure that they understand how consent should be taken and make sure that we communicate with patients in the way that we should do. We're taking steps to work more closely, as the report suggests, work more closely with the Liverpool University Hospitals NHS Trust to support us in our decision making, and for those experts in that centre of excellence to support our multidisciplinary teams to ensure that we make the right decisions for our patients and with our patients day in, day out. I'm really grateful for the early support offered by Liverpool, and this will go far beyond the recommendations within the report. We have made some changes already to support leadership capacity in the service, and we're looking to identify further leadership capacity and resource to further strengthen our internal leadership, but also to give external assurance to our patients and to colleagues across the NHS that we're doing the right thing day in, day out. I'd like to note, but I'm not in a position to discuss in detail, the need to ensure that individuals, whatever their role, have worked within the professional standards laid down by their professional regulators. Suffice at this stage to say that the findings of this report and the current actions have been discussed in detail with the General Medical Council and the Nursing and Midwifery Council, the GMC and the NMC. I'd also like to acknowledge the need and recognise the commitment of the board to consider any lessons from these college review of our vascular service, whether that's for us in the implementation of future reconfiguration of clinical services, or for our leadership and clinical teams across the whole of the health board, so that we hold the mirror up to ourselves in terms of our standard of note-keeping, consent and communication with patients. And as you will have seen in the action plan, this will figure in our clinical audit plans going forward. But despite these notes of caution and the very difficult conversation we're having today, I would like to acknowledge the hard work and commitment of so many of our staff in developing the vascular service. We now hear a patient story every month in our vascular steering group, and some of those stories have been heartbreaking, but we've also heard of some amazing commitments and some wonderful stories, testament to the compassion of our staff. Chair, thank you. I'm very happy to take any questions.
Thanks, Nick. So I'm now going to move to questions, and the first questions are from John Galanders. John.
Okay, thank you. Thanks very much, Nick, for that explanation, and for Joe as well. But the question I'd like to ask is specifically around, in the background papers section of the report, it's reported that the report in March 2019 indicated the organisation had the capacity and capability to establish the new facility at Glenclwyd, which would go live on the 10th of April 2019. In view of the Royal College report, it appears that in hindsight, this statement is misleading at the very least, as neither the resources or the necessary staffing model, as indicated in the original proposal for the centralisation, were in fact in place. Given that this appears to be the case, what assurance can the board have that any future planned service change recommendations fully reflect the risk of resource shortages and any inability to recruit to the necessary key roles to deliver at a safe service? And also, we're also fully aware that recruitment at the moment, as you just referenced, Nick, is still ongoing. So in light of the current position, are we actually in a position to be delivering this service as defined in March 2019 to the right level and capacity required on the 3 sites used in the hub and spoke model? Thank you.
Thank you. Hindsight, of course, is always a fine thing, isn't it? At the moment, having received the report recently, I think my focus is on making things right going forward. I think we are confident that there are things that we can do in order to improve recruitment, but I've already outlined the fact that we do need to take advice and support externally, not least from Liverpool, in order to ensure that our services are sustainable and we're getting that expertise to ensure that we get things absolutely right, John, going forward. I'm not going to comment on decision making and views going back, because I've already alluded to the fact that we need to examine that very carefully in the light to ensure that we follow due process. But for now, John, I can give you the assurance that we are doing everything we possibly can to recruit, that we are working externally to get that added assurance and feedback for us as we make those changes. And of course, we'll bring to the QSE committee and to the board any challenges or problems that we come across on that journey.
Thanks, Nick. Joe?
Thank you, colleagues. Colleagues will be aware that we have commissioned an independent learning review of the decision-making process that was in play with regard to the development of a vascular network in North Wales. That review is currently ongoing and will be reported back through our normal governance routes. I think, John, that will provide us with lessons learned and a framework that will enable us to ensure that we are fully taking on board risks and mitigations as we make any future decisions and recommendations on service change. Thank you.
Can we just go to the heart of two questions, please? The first is, whilst the RCS and others have underwritten and continue to do so, the model that we've gone to, the fact that you as an executive team, and of course we've got the Nick's arrival here and a fresh view, that model remains the appropriate one. And secondly, Nick, that assuming that is your view, what measures we need to take to ensure that any higher level procedures, if necessary, are moved to another vascular service or retained here with the support of another service, and whether any services should be suspended and on what basis that decision is being taken. Could you address those points, Nick, for me and the board?
Thank you, Chair. It is my personal view that the network model, the hub and spoke model, was the right decision. It's not just my view with fresh eyes on this, having looked at the journey the Health Board's been on for the last 7, 8 more years. It's also the view of the Royal College, and following my appointment to the Health Board and also this second report, I contacted a number of learned and respected individuals, experts in vascular services across the country, to test that, and there was unanimous view that we continue to be operating the right model of care. I've asked myself over the last few weeks whether in fact we should continue to operate this model of care. The report doesn't suggest that we should make any huge changes, that we should stop. And again, my recommendation to the board is that we should continue with that model of care going forward. However, I do think we need to ensure some externality and expertise, and in keeping with the Royal College of Surgeons advice, bring them in to support our multidisciplinary decision making in the most difficult decisions for some of our most complex patients. And I'm really grateful to Liverpool, as I've said before, in doing this. I think we need to recognise that the service does have some vulnerability. We are still dependent on some locum staff who of course have very short-term contracts. And whilst I remain convinced that it is the right model, we also need to consider what we would do if we were to lose staff, rather than, as we clearly need to do, gain further staff and make more substantive appointments to the service. So Mark, yes, I think we are doing the right thing. We need to be very honest with ourselves now and going forward, should there be any changes or new challenges to our service. But working with external partners, I think we need to continue the same journey that we're already set on.
Okay, thanks, Nick. John G, before I move on, are you happy that your questions have been addressed, or is there anything you wish to come back on?
I think the key element really is having that assurance of where we are at the moment, and in terms of the fact that there is still recruitment going on. I appreciate it's difficult to give a timeline as to when the service will be fully staffed, both with new staff and ensuring that the existing staff are of the caliber necessary to deliver the service. But I would hope that we could, at an early date, have some clarity of when we will actually be up to full strength to deliver the model. As you've indicated, Nick, there's no recommendation to change the proposed model, but we do need to have some assurance of when we will be up to speed to be able to deliver that model to the scale as defined originally and outlined by the Royal College. Thank you.
Nick, anything you want to add?
I'm going to make no promises as to when we will be at full establishment. You know, I would hope that I would always give you an honest view, and this recruitment is a very difficult area, particularly nationally in vascular services. What I can promise that we will be very clear with the board at all times about any difficulties in staffing and what, if any, implication that has for the continuation of this improvement plan.
Just in that regard, Nick and colleagues, there is a clear expectation from the Minister that I will report to on a monthly basis. I would expect the communication and monitoring of progress to be more frequent than that in any case for the next few weeks, which Nick and Joe are aware of, and will certainly be returning to this topic at the next board meeting and probably the next several board meetings as well. Okay, I'm going to come to Richard now. Richard, your question.
Thank you, Mark. Can you see me?
Yes.
Thanks. I'd like to start off just by thanking you, Mark, Joe, and Nick for the tone of your response to this, which I think is pitched just right and is to be commended. I also welcome what Nick said about looking in more detail at the historical cases that featured in the RCS report and other cases to see what more can be learned to improve things going forwards. But I'd like to ask a question that is more forward focused than that. Could I ask what control arrangements are going to be put in place to ensure that the changes that need to happen do happen, that they happen in a timely way, and in the way that we want them to happen? And specifically, if something should happen where a patient comes in the future and something is not the way that it should be, what specifically would be the control mechanisms to ensure that senior clinicians and also the board become aware of any future shortcomings? Because without those sort of control mechanisms, I think it would be harder to demonstrate that we've really cracked this particular nut. Thank you.
Thank you, Richard. If I may answer, the Vascular Steering Group oversees the action plan. It's an incredibly complex action plan. It has to be, because it has to take on the recommendations of several reports, as well as our own internal learning, results of national audits and other things. The Vascular Group does need, perhaps more than it has in the past, to receive absolute confidence and triangulation when actions have been completed. But also for me, not just that we're ticking the box, but we're asking ourselves that so what question. Have we achieved an action? Have we really achieved it? And is it going to be achieved sustainably going forward? Do we have the capacity to deliver that on an ongoing basis? The controls in any clinical service can be quite challenging. We have national audit outcomes, we have internal audit outcomes, and we're strengthening those internal audits. At the Vascular Steering Group, we now receive regular DATEX, regular notifications when any quality incidents occur, and challenge ourselves very clearly as to whether we are understanding the full picture that's taking place in the vascular service. So those control mechanisms are there, and we're making them as effectively as we possibly can, Richard. But I think in addition, it is the externality, that oversight, bringing Liverpool into our service in order to ensure that we're getting that triangulation of view. I always worry, as any executive will, what are the unknown unknowns? And I think that is the real challenge in the walkabout on the clinical wards, to talking to patients, to really understanding the issues behind complaints, and to make sure that we never fall into the trap of making this a transactional response, but we make it a truly caring, effective and sustainable response, Richard.
Thank you, Nick. I think the key test for the general public is going to be, how can they be assured that when they come into our hospitals that they will get the level of care that they would expect? I think your reply is welcome, but that will be the key measure going forwards, I'm sure.
Thanks, Richard. Joe wants to comment.
Thank you. Just by way of addition, we are reviewing the way that we undertake our executive board toward site visits, and reviewing our clinical audit programme to ensure that there's a stronger link between areas that may be such as vascular, where we want to keep a particular view and oversight upon. So those will be additional opportunities over and above those which were outlined by Nick, to be able to check and challenge progress. Thank you.
I'm sure that will be welcomed by everybody, Joe. It's a topic that we've discussed. To find ourselves in this position again will be, I'm sure you will agree, just simply unacceptable, given that we have been focused on this topic for some time as a board, raising concerns, and that in the end we found it necessary to commission an independent review because we were not being assured. I do not expect us as a board to return to that point. And what will be key is the mechanisms you just referred to being put in place, and also an expectation that if senior individuals or whomsoever in this organisation don't know the answers to the question, they tell us they don't know, and they'll go away and find out the answer. And we have to absolutely have to be clear on that point in terms of this board and the behaviours and expectations that we have together and individually. Richard, are you happy that your questions have been addressed?
Yes, I am. Thank you very much, Mark.
Okay, I'm now going to come to Lucy. Lucy, thanks, Richard.
Thank you, Chair. First of all, I echo the opening remarks made by the Chair this morning. I think there is clearly, and we've alluded to, is a lot of anger and disappointment around the board table today. My question relates then to the fact that we received regular reports at QSE committee and to board as well, that this service was under significant scrutiny, particularly when you compare it with other services across the board. And so what is of real concern is that we then find ourselves in this position having received this report. And I recognise that that has been the assurance versus reassurance has already been alluded to by Nick. I suppose my question then is around what's going to be different this time round, but also it does then beg the question about, could this be happening in other services that we are receiving reports about, that those services are operating safely?
Thank you, Lucy. I share your concerns and have thought long and hard as to how we can be absolutely assured that we are understanding where improvements still need to be made and are assured that the actions in place are the right ones and are effective. The answer, I think, for me is the triangulation of all the different sources of data whether it be from Datex, whether it be from the action plan, whether it be from our internal audit, whether it be from our external audit, whether it be from our patient stories. And for me, perhaps going forward, I need to take more time to make absolutely sure that within all that picture, there isn't something that we are missing as we focus rightly on the action plans and the assurance behind those. Are there lessons for us as a board that may apply to other parts of the service that we offer our patients? I would say undoubtedly that there are, and indeed our senior clinical and operational leadership teams have already asked that question of themselves and continue to answer it, to ask it and to look for answers. I know that from that work that the quality of clinical notes across the health boards is not always what it should be. And I think that, and we're also can see issues in terms of consent and communication with patients, and already putting in place actions in partnership with the GMC and other external agencies to ensure that we put those right and the professional standards are exercised as they should be. For me, Lucy, there's a real question also for us as to the effectiveness and the efficacy of our annual clinical audit plan, which you won't be surprised to know next year will undoubtedly include a review of our clinical notes and our consent keeping. And for me, going forward, we need to ensure that we look at our national audit results, outcomes, and our reviews, and make sure that we are auditing and learning that lesson going forward. This needs to be a learning organisation where we're absolutely focused on doing the right thing for patients. And I think there's time to stand back and reflect on that following receipt of this report.
Lucy, anything you want to come back on or add?
Yes, thank you, Chair. Thanks for that, Nick. And yes, we've discussed how clinical audit will receive more focus, which is very much welcomed. I do have to ask the question, you have, again, you've alluded to it in some of your earlier responses. The question has to be asked as well about culpability. In respect to, you've mentioned about professional standards and there are discussions going on with regulators. Can you provide assurance to the board that the most appropriate steps will be taken, please, in relation to addressing some of those issues? Thank you.
Absolutely, Lucy. We need to do the right and the fair thing by our patients to ensure that we ensure that our staff are following professional standards at all times. When they're not, that we ask the question and look at that in detail. I hope you'll understand, however, we need to do the right thing and we need to follow the processes exactly as we should do. Therefore, further discussion that might relate to any possible investigation of any individuals or any regulatory action, it wouldn't be appropriate to discuss now.
Thank you. Now, of course, I appreciate that. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Lucy. And on the subject of support and development, I think Lynn has a question in that area. Lynn.
Yes, thank you. If I was a member of staff in the vascular whole service, what support and developmental needs are being given to me as a member of staff to allow me to reflect on what's been said, to move forward and to have my voice heard?
Thank you, Lynn. Part of that is easy to answer. Part of it, I think, more difficult to ensure that we're doing absolutely the right thing. The GMC and the NMC provide very expert packages of professional standard workshops and teaching, and we're working closely with them to see whether we can adapt their existing packages to absolutely respond to the issues highlighted in this report. And those one of those meetings is taking place in the next few days, and further workshops will be rolled out within the vascular service, but more widely. So there are actions, but I suppose for me, I do worry that there are some really good people within our service, loads of really good staff within the vascular service who are probably hurting because they come to work to do the right thing every day, and they do, because of course we're focusing on the failings, of the service and the areas of challenge, not on the many successes. So I do still worry that we're not providing that pastoral support for our staff to make sure that we're listening to their hurt and their anxiety, and that we ensure that we don't find that the morale of the team starts to fall apart as we scrutinise it and as we hold them to account for delivery of good quality services. So the transactional stuff is happening, Lynn. I think we really need to examine whether the pastoral, the softer but really important stuff is happening as well, because that's just as important.
So can we ensure that that does happen? Should we be putting programmes in ourselves other than just relying on external bodies?
I think we are asking ourselves and our staff, perhaps more importantly, that question. And indeed, there's a meeting just after this in order to discuss how we can do that effectively and keep a continuing monitor on that going forward.
Thank you.
Okay, thanks, Lynn. Thanks, Nick. Any other questions the colleagues wish to pose? No, okay, I can't see any hands. Oh, John, over to you.
Thanks, Mark. I was slow to get the hand up. I was just reflecting on some of the earlier questions, and a key point of assurance for us is the vascular steering group to ensure that as we go forward, that the services are delivered to the right level of professional standard that we rightly expect to happen. Is it worth giving us a little bit more detail, Nick, in terms of the structure of that, its remit, so that we can gain assurance that it is going to operate in the right way, and that it's not perceived to be marking our own homework, if you see what I mean?
Yeah, thanks, John. I've looked at the vascular steering group since joining the health board 6 months ago now, it is, to really ensure that we do that. We have brought in a patient story to each and every meeting to give you a flavour of the way the meeting works. We now receive regular summaries of complaints, Datex incidents, and a view of our quality markers into the group, and examine those very carefully. We receive regular reports from the various work streams, whether that's from the effective use of the hybrid theatre, whether it's the recruitment of medical staff and other clinical staff, and I think following the second stage review, then further work stream reports will need to be coming through, and that work is already underway. There's always a danger, isn't there, that there's marking of our own homework, and to that end, the Community Health Council have a representative on that group, and there are and that is a very useful challenge as well as support. And we also have patient representation on that group to really ask ourselves whether we're doing what we need to be doing, John. In addition to the vascular steering group, that governance, which then reports into QSE, we also have a vascular oversight group, which is the operational detail, really, with the senior operational and clinical leaders meeting together to really be honest with ourselves about where items of the action plan may be flagging or are in danger of flagging, where, as in earlier conversations, where there may be a risk to delivery because of recruitment or other issues. And I think that provides also that real self-challenge to make sure that we're doing what we need to do. And additionally, of course, the board oversight and QSE's oversight for board provides us that. The externality of Liverpool and the vascular quality panel will, I think, also help us to triangulate our actions. Thanks, John.
Thanks, Nick. I think it's that independent external element that I think just gives me more reassurance, and obviously the assurance will come as we operate that steering group and we work through the action plan going forward. But thanks for the update.
Nick, you referred to an independent chair of the group. That being the case, I'd like to meet with them at some point, and perhaps if Lucy is chair of the QSE committee. So we are in a position to share some of the concerns that have existed around this service for some time and gain some assurance as to their role in chairing the group and how they will do that? Can that be arranged?
Of course it can. We hope to confirm the appointment. If not already confirmed as we speak, it will be confirmed in the next day or so, and then can make arrangements for that meeting to happen, of course, Chair.
Thanks, Nick. Lynn.
Thank you. I'd like us to focus a few minutes on the patients that we treated in this service. Some of them will now see this report and be very concerned about the treatment that they've received, and their families will be equally concerned. What are we doing to help people and patients that have used the service?
Thank you, Lynn. So one of the key, you'll have read the recommendations of the Royal College report. One of the key focuses for the quality panel will be to contact the relatives, the patients, the families, the carers of the 44 families affected within the case, within the Royal College review, in addition to the 6 families whose notes weren't able to be reviewed by the college, as well as making sure that we look at our complaints, our incidents, to make sure that we are feeding back to families, supporting them with the cases that we know about. I would anticipate, and indeed over the last week or two, we have had a number of people come forward because of the media stories around vascular service rightly coming forward with concerns. I received a letter this morning which brought me close to tears in terms of the story that patient described in relation to the care we had given his wife in the past. I think as we begin to understand further aspects of our care, particular pathways, particular areas of our practice, it may well be that we need to be reaching out to more groups and more families in order to ensure that we're exercising that duty of candour and doing the right thing. I think though it's too early to speculate the size and scale of that, and I do look to the independent chair of the vascular quality panel to be advising us and supporting us to make sure that we do the right thing by those families.
So are we sending anything out, any communication to all these patients that have used our service?
No, not as yet, Lynn, because at the moment we wouldn't be in a position to identify the right people, the right patients to send that communication to. But as soon as we are able to have a message to share and to identify the people we should be contacting, we will of course be doing so.
Thank you.
Nick, in that regard, I'd expect the Quality and Safety Committee chaired by Lucy to have a particular interest around the quality and safety of previous services and continuing services and the examination of any harm caused. You'll know that, I guess Lucy will know that, but we need to ensure that occurs in that forum, don't we?
We do indeed, Chair, and I can assure you that we will.
Okay. Thank you. Any other questions? No. Oh yes, John Galanders, you want to come back in?
Yeah, thanks, Chair. Different angle on the question, really. We've heard about the staffing vacancies, but I would just like a clarification with regard to the finances at the moment. Going forward to look at the original plan of how things were going to be delivered, do we currently have the financial budget to actually deliver that for the necessary staffing levels? And equally, are there any outstanding capital investments that need to be undertaken with a view to actually bringing the service delivery side up to the standard that was originally envisaged? So it's an overall budget element, both in terms of revenue and capital going forward to ensure that we do have the ability to deliver the good quality service that we're aiming for. Thank you.
Thank you, John. So there is a vascular component to our IMTP process for the coming year, and a recognition that there does need to be further revenue investment in the service. And I would not foresee that there will be, I think the rate limiting factor will not be finance, it will be recruitment and finding the right people of the highest caliber to support us in development of the service. In addition, in terms of revenue, we're currently reliant on some agency staff who of course are relatively high cost. Whilst there will be additional expenditure in supporting additional staff, the net cost perhaps won't be quite as high as it first seems, John. But I would emphasise that this is not a revenue finance concern for me. This is a quality concern, and there is that need to identify the highest quality staff. In terms of capital investment, I'm not aware of any significant capital investment to support the vascular improvement plan. Of course, we've already invested hugely in our state-of-the-art hybrid theatre, which is, really is state-of-the-art, one of the nation's best. And that is right at the foundation of the service going forward. So no, John, in terms of additional capital, I don't think there's any significant requirements.
Okay, thanks for that. Could I just come back on the point you just raised around agency staff? Do we have any indication at all about the percentage of staff which are actually permanent BCU staff versus the percentage of staff that we're having to rely on an agency basis, which I presume could end up with fluctuations of who is actually available to deliver the service at any one time? Because that appears to be a significant risk element if we are using agency staff who are actually having to backfill some of the core roles that we need to deliver the quality service. Thanks.
Yeah, so we do have that detail, of course, John, and the headline summary will be to the consultant level, recognising that the service isn't just about consultants. We currently have two high quality agency staff supporting a combination of substantive staff, consultant staff, but also some longer term non-agency locums who are in place. So our work is to increase our numbers, to convert our agency staff reliance to a longer term locum that we employ directly, and convert those longer term locums into that full substantive workforce. But our current two agency doctors, high quality and brilliant as they are, you're absolutely right, our point of weakness and vulnerability at the current time because of the contractual arrangements with agency staff.
Thanks, Nick. Jackie, did you have a question?
Thanks, Mark. First of all, I think it's appropriate to say and offer further apologies from the board in terms of the harm that has been caused to patients. But my question is a bit more basic and around the incompleteness of the notes that's recorded by the RCS report. I noticed that the imaging sections were quite often missing in the report. And I wanted to know whether that will be addressed in the action plan, as I couldn't find it. There's discussion around the lack of imaging, but not actually whether it was a lack of imaging or a lack of input of the reports into the notes that was the issue. And I'd just appreciate knowing that that will be addressed in the action plan. Thank you.
Thank you, Jackie. Yes, it will be addressed in the action plan. I think there are two things happening there. One is that the images were not always available for practical reasons to the reviewers. So the images would have been reviewed by the clinical teams, were a part of the clinical record, but weren't available for physical practicalities to the review team. So therefore they were unable to comment. In addition, though, there is a question to ourselves and for me with the clinical team as to whether we are fully using images within our MDT processes in the way that we should be. And of course, that's where we are very lucky, fortunate to have Liverpool working alongside us going forward in order to be able to give me that assurance.
Jackie, you content?
Thanks, Mark. Yes.
Okay. Any other questions that colleagues want to pose? No? Okay. So before I conclude the meeting, I just want to be clear, or as clear as I can be, that our expectation as a board now is that this matter will be progressed with a high degree of urgency in terms of moving forward with the response is to the recommendations and the broader considerations that have been highlighted during this meeting. We are taking some comfort from the fact that Nick, as our new medical director, has demonstrated a willingness to change the areas that need to be changed in a number of key respects, with the support of Joe and other members of the executive team. But that will need to continue. As I've said already, I am under an obligation to report to the Minister on a monthly basis. I intended to do that anyway, but I will be doing it. And every month, therefore, this board will receive an update on progress against those action plans and other issues. And we'll return to this topic in our March board meeting. But in the meantime, let me just repeat all that's been said in terms of the anger, concern, disappointment, and many other feelings that I hold around this whole topic, and how we've come to be here, as I know is shared by those other members who've spoken in the board meetings today and their colleagues. This is the and can only be the final stage in seeking to remedy this service, because we will not be back here either in terms of vascular or other services without there being, of course, consequences and implications for us to work through as a board. So please be assured that the necessary progress is going to be monitored, reported upon, and overseen by the board and its various committees. And we seek to support the executive team in achieving what needs to be achieved in the fastest but most appropriate fashion. Thank you. I will therefore close the meeting at this point. Diolch yn fawr iawn. See you at the next meeting.